All right, welcome everybody. We're here with Dr. Butler and round two of our COVID discussion and relaunching school. And we have some great opportunities to connect. So if you have some questions that you'd like to ask Dr. Butler, again, just quick introductions, Doctor. And you also have a kid at our school.
Yeah. So I'm Ian. I'm an ICU doctor. Actually, was originally an ER doctor that went back and did
All
a
right,
couple
welcome
more years
everybody.
of
We're here
training.
with Dr. Butler and round two
Sounds like
of
someone's
our
got the YouTube
COVID
running in the
discussion
background
and
there.
relaunching school. And we have some great opportunities to connect. So if you have some questions.
You got the mute going. All right, perfect. So for me, my experience with COVID has been that anybody in the Palomar, Pomerado Hospital, so I'm the medical director for the ICUs there. Anybody within those hospitals that's had COVID, I've probably had a hand helping, and certainly anybody who's been on a ventilator in ICU, I've had very close, work with them. In addition to that, nationally, I actually work with about 15 ICUs and coordinate all their care together because the doctors are all partners in my same group, and I'm our national director for critical care. So that's been awesome because I've been able to talk to doctors in New York, Chicago, Northern California, Southern California, St. Louis, and kind of really get an understanding of how this disease is different from place to place. And I don't know, Joe, did I share with you this thing about the latitude and how there was a difference between mortality based on where you were? I can't remember if I'd done that work before or after. Um, if anyone's curious, should I share my screen real quick? Uh, I can't hear you if you're on mute, but I'm gonna share my screen and let's see how this goes because this is kind of interesting. This, by the way, what I just opened up to is the total cases that we had in our at Palomar. So this is the Escondido Hospital, and you can see that back around April into May we had our peak, and this line down here are patients that are on ventilators, and that number had kind of gone down. We actually took a couple patients. The reason this bump is going back up is we've taken patients from El Centro where they don't have ICU doctors and brought them into our hospital. The National Guard is out there now, but I've also kind of helped coordinate some of the work out in El Centro, and there's two hospitals out there, and I know a lot of the docs there. But this is what I really wanted to share with you guys. What I did, and this was just because I had too much time and I couldn't sleep at night, is I took a Wikipedia article of the top 30 cities. Baltimore is where my sister lives, which is why I cut it off at 30 instead of like 20 or something. And what I did is I took their population, and on that there is also their concentration, their population per square mile. There's also their latitude, and I graphed the mortality, which is the number of deaths divided by the population, and I plotted it against population density and latitude. And so, if you can imagine, these cities are this is New York and Philadelphia, Denver. This is when you're looking at latitude. These cities all share Chicago. They all share a similar higher latitude. When you drop below about the 35th point, you end up with much less mortality, right? Or 34. This is LA, this bump right here. That's because it's a concentrated city, you end up with more death, even though it's in the southern climate. But San Diego, we're like right here. And these cities down here are Houston and Austin and these southern cities. There's a reason that the southern cities, including Miami and Florida, where all these people go to retire, Tampa, with possibly one exception, which was New Orleans. And as you can imagine, New Orleans has that population density factor against it as well. But and it's not in this list. It's not a big enough city to make it here. But anyways, the further south you are, the warmer your weather is, and that kills the virus. And the more sun you get, and that kills the virus. And the more vitamin D you get, and that boosts your immune system, which means that we don't have the same mortality. The reason that I put these slides together is I was doing a talk for a bunch of doctors, several hundred doctors last week. And what I was trying to express to them was your care depends on your city. In other words, don't do what I'm doing in San Diego. What I'm doing in San Diego is what is, I think, fantastic for San Diego, but it may not be the right thing for Chicago, and it may not be the right thing for New York. So that's what this was. The other thing is population density. And if you guys can see this down here, again, this is New York, right? The denser your city is, Philadelphia, the more your COVID is going to be a problem. And we're down here. We're not a very dense city. We're in northern San Diego County for us specifically. And so, these are things that I look at, not just to say to doctors across the country, consider this disease in the context of your community, but also for my doctors here and for myself and my patients and my family, right? Something that Joe keyed into from a conversation we had before, which was none of my patients were riding a bicycle before they ended up on a ventilator in the ICU. And you asked me that again, Joe. You said, well, is that still the case? The answer is yes. I still haven't had a healthy person come in and go on a ventilator. It doesn't mean it won't happen. It doesn't mean it can't happen. But I can tell you that it hasn't happened in northern, North County here. And the reason for that is because we're in the best place to go through COVID. Warm, sunny San Diego with a spread out population. And so, there are kind of advantages to living in San Diego and the fact that our taxes are so high.
Right. So we kind of want to get into the idea of, relaunching school. And there was some questions from our last conversation with our parents last Thursday around masks specifically. And there was this interesting study that you were talking about with guinea pigs. Can you tell us more about guinea pigs and masks? That sounds like an interesting combination.
So, and let me just say, I'm not an expert in whether or not it's the right time to reopen a school and what schools should do or anything like that, right? The only time I find myself in schools is when I'm either they're given to talk about, being a doctor and trying to inspire little kids, which happens sometimes, or actually dropping mine off. So it's not like I really understand what a school should do, but I do understand masks. And my understanding of masks is, the guinea pig study you asked about, right? So somebody actually took coronavirus, which guinea pigs can get, and put a bunch of them in a bunch of cages close by each other. And some of them had masks on the outside going out. So infected little guinea pigs had a mask protecting the other guinea pigs. Uninfected, some of them had masks, some of them didn't. And they had all these guinea pigs just basically hang out in a room together for a couple of days. And what they found was having a mask on the sick guinea pig actually decreased infections the most. So as I'm talking to you right now, I'm literally spraying out all this. Every time I say a consonant, I obstruct the airflow in my mouth. And it's a wet surface, which means that a little droplet launches into the air. And, right now it's hitting my computer screen. I'm not even aware of it. But the fact is, whenever I'm talking, something's coming out of my mouth. I told you, Joe, about how I had Brody and we sat down and he had some ice cream that we got from a blue popsicle. And I was trying to explain this concept to him about why he needs to wear a mask and why we want people wearing masks when we go out, because he at first had a hard time with it. And we just put a white piece of paper down between us, and he got to eat the entire popsicle and just talk to me. And we just talked. And, he wasn't shouting. Every once in a while, he'd get excited and say something, because that's just the nature of a 4-year-old. But at the end of our conversation, we picked up the paper and inspected it. And sure enough, there's little blue droplets on this piece of paper. So, and I basically said, look, if you had coronavirus, that would be what I would be worried about getting. You can imagine if you had a mask on, none of that would have come out. With the guinea pigs, it's not completely protective, but it decreased infections the most to have a guinea pig wearing a mask. The second thing was you could decrease about half of the infections by having a guinea pig wearing a mask that was not infected. And the idea there is that, these little droplets, they hang in the air for a little bit. I don't know how long. It depends on the temperature, the humidity, how much the person was talking when they shot out that particle, right? Singing is probably the worst thing you could do in terms of shouting, or being at a crowded bar shouting at people. So two things I would not do right now would be choir practice or going to a noisy bar, because I'd be worried about people spewing everything out. But anyway, so putting the mask on the guinea pig prevents them from inhaling that little droplet that's hanging in the air. So, my take on masks is there's probably part of the reason that Asia did not get hit as hard as we did is it's already in their culture to go to school, walk around, ride a bus, wearing a mask, etc. I kind of don't like it. Like I really hate it. And I wear masks all the time and I'm comfortable with them. I don't like the lack of facial expressions. I don't like not knowing, sometimes some people say like, I didn't realize how hard of hearing I was until I can't see anybody's mouth anymore. Like it really, I just hate masks. But the reality is until we have a vaccine, I think I'll be wearing a mask and I'll be asking my wife to wear a mask when we go out in public. And, it's not, I don't think that getting the virus would be that big of a deal for me. It could knock me off my feet. I don't know, but why take a chance if the alternative is I'm going to wear a mask for the next 6 months? And so that's kind of where we're at with it.
The piece that we were chatting about as well is that like the intensity of the infection, and you talked a little bit about, we probably from our own immune system is pretty strong, especially robust people who are riding a bike and doing that thing.
Yep.
But it's being in that COVID space over multiple sessions, and you notice that with doctors who are in that intensity space. So kind of that's probably the piece that we have to kind of figure out is that give and take around exposure.
Yeah. So I am in direct contact with people who have COVID, and that's, I have to be. I touch them, I take care of them, and I do high risk procedures for them. So as you can imagine, I really think a lot about the virus and protecting myself, my doctors, my nurses, and so what I've read is when doctors get sick, the severity of their illness directly correlates with two things: the number of patients that they saw, as well as the amount of time that they spent caring for patients. So in other words, the amount of virus that you're exposed to directly correlates with the severity of your illness. If one person walking by you coughs and it's in the air, it gets in your mouth, that might actually be a blessing. You might actually get a really light version of the disease, build up some immunity to it, and go about your merry way with nothing more than, a slight cough and a fever or something like that. If you're on a crowded subway and 5 people cough in the air and there's no ventilation in that subway system, you're going to get it. And New York showed us that. And you're not just going to get it a little bit, you're going to get it seriously. That whole thing about people not riding a bike, that's San Diego. That's not the case in Chicago. That's not the case in New York. In those places, healthy people got it, because no matter how healthy you are, you get in a subway car with a bunch of people that are all infected with this pathogen, you're going to get it. And the amount that you're exposed to directly correlates with the severity of your illness. This is pretty much widely accepted and well documented, but I don't know, these are kind of my opinions, right? I don't think this has actually been tested to see exactly how much, you get and that sort of thing. But, so for myself, for example, the doctors, right? At the hospital, we don't have a single doctor running the COVID service, right? Going and seeing everybody. We spread it out. So we have 5 doctors going and seeing all those patients so that each person is only getting exposed just a little bit. Those kinds of things tell you that doctors know the amount of pathogen correlates with the severity. And
kind of like a radiation, right? They have those radiation gauges,
sure.
Geiger counters,
It is,
almost.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and nothing's universal, right? Like, one exposure could certainly knock somebody off their feet. They could be healthy, but that's generally not happening.
So that kind of just circle back then to your own kiddo, preschooler, and wearing masks and washing hands. And it's kind of a practice now that we need to maybe train up our kids, because there's this energy around, not wanting to kind of change and the facial expressions and the experience. But you're saying that it clearly makes a difference, the mask specifically. And what should we do with kids? Like, that's an all day change. It's not like we're getting on a plane and we have to take off our shoes, the inconvenience. This is an all day experience if we were to be back at school. So talk to us about that and your own kid.
Mike, yeah. So when Brody plays with another child, I don't ask him to wear a mask. One kid, right? When we go into public, we do. And similarly with myself, when I'm hanging out with a friend, I'm not like wearing a mask. Certain things have changed. Like I don't, maybe I'm more conscientious about not shouting at somebody directly in their face. Like maybe there's a little bit more distance between us. But if it's kind of one person, I'm not asking my kid wear a mask all the time with all contact, avoid everybody at all costs. So I don't know. That's just not what I think needs to be done. But if you said to me, putting him in a situation where it's a bunch of kids, then I'd be asking him to wear a mask, and or a bunch of people, like going to the grocery store. Right now, we kind of even minimize that, right? I had to go pick up something at the auto parts store today, Home Depot the other day, and those are places that I used to always take him, and it was like a fun thing to do. And right now, we're just not doing that. And there are kids out there, and I don't judge parents for doing it at all, but I tend not to do that. And I'm getting to a spot where maybe we will be. Mask wearing for him has been a tough thing. I think that that explaining it to him, man, my kid knows so much about coronavirus. You can imagine, right? That's what he gets for his bedtime stories. You know, by the way, I don't know if I shared this with you guys. There's a book, if you just Google coronavirus book, and Joe, I'll get you the link to it, coronavirus book for kids. There is an ebook about coronavirus, and we've read through that as well. It shows pictures. It kind of explains why we wash our hands and that sort of thing. If anybody's into Curious George, there's a Curious George Discovers Germs. That's another good one. And then the little experiment that he loved to do, which was eat a popsicle over a piece of white paper. You know, those are things that kind of just, I think that he needed to understand that when we talk, little particles come out of our mouth. And most of us don't, you know, we kind of suppress that because we don't like the idea that we're constantly walking around spitting on each other, right? But we are. And so to show that to him, I think helped in terms of getting him to buy into wearing the mask. And yes, he hates it. Yes, it's hot. Yes, he pulls it down sometimes, but he's certainly much more willing to wear it now, I think, after kind of going through those things.
That's good. There was another question earlier from our previous conversation around kids getting exposure and then, you know, getting sick. I mean, you were telling me that all viruses do that in a way, that you get some type of infection.
Yeah, the kids.
I remember what that was called, that particular syndrome. Or
Kawasaki
disease.
syndrome. Yeah. So Kawasaki syndrome is basically this inflammation of your heart, and it's almost like a heart attack for kids. It can be fatal, and it can be really bad. As far as I know, there has not been many cases outside of severely infected areas. So remember that whole thing about the dose. You know, if the cases coming out of New York and these bigger cities, those are probably kids that got exposed either in their household or out in public prior to, you know, a lot of the social distancing stuff or whatever, and they probably got large inoculums. That being said, this is not really a disease that harms children that much. And so I really look at my kids as a vector of transmission, not as people that are at risk. And, you know, realize I come home, right? I literally hang out with people who have this virus, and I come home and I have to make a decision about, am I going to hug my kid or not? And early on, I wasn't. Early on, I was, you know, trying to get out of the house before they were awake and get back in after they went to bed and not see them for like the week that I was on. And then, you know, now I think as we've learned more about the disease and I've seen it not killing a bunch of kids and a lot of kids not getting infected and that sort of thing, you know, for me, I've kind of gotten much more relaxed. I take a shower now when I come home from the hospital, which I didn't used to do every time. And I don't hug my family until I've had that shower. But sure, and I change my clothes and leave them in the garage. And I think most docs and nurses are doing that these days. But I'm not as worried about giving it to them. And again, I'm not telling people to you know, expose your kid to it, but it's kind of one of those things where I'm just not as worried about it. If I had one thing I understand, my neighbor, who's like a good friend of mine, his parents live in his house with him. And so he does really isolate his kid a little bit more, you know, and his kid has, and I get that because he doesn't want the virus coming home. In my house, there's nobody that's going to get hurt from it. But in a house, if you have elderly people, I get that. And so I think everyone has to kind of have their own approach to this based on their social situation.
Yeah, it's maybe a good time to talk a little bit about vaccines and maybe a little history about vaccines themselves, that we actually used to put real cultures in people, right? and that's we don't really do that anymore. That probably doesn't go over very well, but that was the reality of a vaccine, right? And maybe the trajectory you see on that, Dr. Butler's version of that, and maybe the seasonality of the virus that you might think about as well.
Yeah. So, Salk, right? The Salk Institute's right here in town. And that guy injected himself with a live, but what we call attenuated version of the vaccine, because it was going to just be too impossible to get FDA clearance to inject live vaccine viruses into people. And I believe he got a Nobel Prize for it. He certainly gave us vaccines. Nowadays, we're not doing that as much, but the point is, a small dose your body can handle of almost everything. There's certain things that I would not take a chance on, like Ebola, but with this coronavirus, if you said to me, we can give you a very, very small inoculum of it, Ian, you're going on vacation for 4 weeks. You're going to be able to get sick, get back to work, because we don't need you for 4 weeks at the hospital. Would you take a small dose of it? I personally would actually take that. And again, I'm not telling people to go out and get infected, but if I knew that I could do it in a way that didn't impact my life at all, where I could isolate myself and go through it, I probably would do the Salk version of getting the virus. None of my docs are doing that. We're not going around trying to get the virus, trust me. But the reality is a small amount of this virus is actually not that scary to me. And I can tell you it was, March 31st, I think it was March 31st that I just remember feeling some serious fear, about this. I had a guy, I don't know if anybody's on Instagram, I've got this Instagram, page where I pretty much just have pictures of my Jeep and the boys out camping and stuff like that. It's Doc Wrangler, but Wrangler like a Jeep. There's a day where I posted a picture of me wearing a complete hazmat suit, and I put on this complete hazmat suit and held up a sign like "Stay at home" or something. And that day, I think it was March 31st, I was going in to put a guy on a machine, on a ventilator, and I just remember getting that dressed up and just being really kind of afraid of this whole thing. And now, March, April, May, 2 months later, April, May, so 8 weeks later, I think that we've kind of had enough experience where we've seen a lot of people get better. A lot of people in San Diego specifically get better. We've learned this is not New York. This is not the problem they had in New York. It's a very different reason why things have gotten out of control in other parts of the country. But, we're pretty well prepared here in San Diego. We've been really lucky. And we also just live in the best place to go through it.
Yeah. And you notice that there are some drugs that actually do make a difference.
Right. Yeah.
And
we
that
have
actually that actually not a hindrance. And there's been a lot of media about that.
Yeah.
Maybe seasonality of the virus. You see that coming and going like the regular flu. And then you were talking a little bit about children as vectors of transmission. And maybe speak a little bit more about that. Like if you have grandparents or pre-existing conditions at home and kids are coming back to school, maybe kind of talk us through that in the context of school. And so vectors of transmission and seasonality.
Yeah. So as far as the seasonality goes, I expect that just like the flu, the rest of the country, not San Diego, the rest of the country is going to be indoors, spending more time in close proximity to each other, passing around influenza, and they're probably going to be passing around coronavirus. It's not going to be as bad as this first time because there's going to be a lot of people, 30% of New Yorkers, right, have been exposed to this. And so it's not going to be as bad. Maybe by January, February, we might actually have a vaccine. I'm like an optimist, and I think we will. Because I think, you shave $1 trillion off the stock market and people pay attention. And so there's a lot of money going into trying to develop a cure for this, way more money than ever went into any vaccine, in history. And I think what's happened is we've kind of, not just this, I think we're learning so much that another virus pops out a year from now, we're going to handle it a lot better. So all that I can tell you, I know health systems have learned a ton. And so the seasonality, it's going to happen. The flu is going to come back. Coronavirus is going to come back. Just like the flu and the way that it hit San Diego, we're going to peak probably a little bit later than the rest of the country. The rest of the country is going to get it, and then they're going to give it to us. And we'll end up with a February, March timeline probably of having a little bit of a resurgence, of coronavirus here. These are, by the way, I'm totally making this stuff up, right? This is my view of the world. Who knows what's going to happen? And as far as the kids being the vector of disease, yeah, I'm not that worried about Brody getting it. I'm more worried about him giving it to somebody, and so him getting it, having symptoms, not having symptoms doesn't even matter. He's a kid. He touches stuff. He spreads it. Kids spread stuff, and so, if I had elderly people in my house, I would probably be handling things different, either isolating him more or isolating them more. I don't know. I can tell you that I was on a call today with doctors, and one of my docs is his wife is going through chemo, and he is literally sleeping in a tent in their backyard. And I can tell you that if I had symptoms, if I get a fever, I'm also going to be sleeping in a tent. So it's not like, I'm completely cavalier about passing it off to my family. But so my worry about kids would be that they could transmit it if I had, at-risk people in my house. And at-risk being people with uncontrolled medical problems, going through chemo, elderly, those sorts of things. And I would even add that, and again, I'm just making this up, but I would extend that at-risk population to small babies, I think. And I don't know what the age cutoff is there. I've got a doc who just had a baby, like literally just had a baby in April. And, he isolates himself from the baby when he's been working. We basically try to group our shifts together. And so, again, I don't want to freak anybody out that's got a baby, but I probably would just be a little bit more cautious if I had one in the house, but I don't. So, I'm less worried about it.
Yeah. Trying to put in the right precautions to allow people to come back in time for school, be it, partially, if half the kids are not. But this idea that, maybe temperature checks and wearing masks, could we get a false sense of security doing temperature checks, thinking that maybe 48 hours before that there was zero symptoms and zero fever? Is that a reality? Or
yeah, definitely. So the temperature check thing is, again, I'm saying something that probably doesn't jive with most people's official policy, but the temperature check is not picking up many folks. I asked, because we do temperature checks at the hospital, and at least 10 times I've asked the people doing the check, catch any fevers today? The answer is always nope. And the other thing is, if it's morning time, we're all walking in from a cool outdoors, and they're always like, oh, your temp is 90 degrees. Like, no, probably not, but I'll take the pass. So, so never mind the fact that people can be asymptomatic carriers and that you can transmit this prior to having that big fever. The temperature check, while a lot of people are going to do it, fine. And maybe you'll pick up some 1 in 1,000, but it's probably not going to be that protective. Mask wearing, I think, is going to be a helpful thing and makes sense to me. I don't know. I think we can do a lot for kind of decreasing. So when I say isolation, I don't mean isolating yourself from an individual or your friend set, right? To me, social isolation means isolating yourself from large groups of people or fast moving, spreading people, right? So if you said to me, we're going to take your kids and they're going to come into a classroom and they're only going to hang out with their classroom, and we're not going to have a big joint lunchtime where everyone eats in the cafeteria together, I would say, yeah, that makes sense to me. If you said to me, we're going to, even cut the class size down in half and have kids come every other day or something like it. So, okay, that kind of makes sense too. I'm not advocating for that. I don't know what the right thing is, but those kinds of things where you're kind of decreasing the number, but I don't think we have to so completely isolate folks. It's more about decreasing the size of your cohort that you're kind of going through life with. And if you can just decrease the number of people you're coming in contact with, and when you are contacting a bunch of strangers, have that mask and wash those hands, then I think we can decrease the spread. And the other thing is, just remember, man, this whole thing is going to be over. We are going to find a vaccine to this, right? The flu, don't downplay the flu. The flu killed hundreds of millions of people before we had a vaccine. And, people say, oh, people, don't compare coronavirus to the flu. Like, well, actually the flu is really bad. The difference is we have a vaccine and we have treatment. And so, The flu in itself has been used to be a really big deal. And so similarly, I have complete confidence that we're going to fix this one too. And the flu mutate changes and the vaccine doesn't always work. And 50, 60,000 people die every year from it. It's not a joke. My practice changes. Like my ICU changes every winter because of the flu. And that's going to happen now with coronavirus too. But we're going to get back to a place where we're comfortable walking around because we have the vaccine, and there's going to be much less of this. So whatever it is, like that's kind of what I remind myself. It's just like, don't freak out. This is not forever. This is until some time period next year, and we're gonna.
And there's some things that we should be taking into account, like you said, using masks and not singing at each other.
Yeah.
Directly.
Don't
maybe
go
in
to
your
choir
car
practice. I think everyone heard about the choir practice, right, up in Washington.
Yeah, right. Yeah. What maybe last bit, and we'll use the backside of our conversation here with our family and friends to use as questions and answers. We can actually see the future.
Yeah.
That's what I heard. We can see the future. It might be just 2 months, but hey, talk to me more about this idea of seeing the future.
Yeah. So, I was brainstorming with some retired docs and also docs that are in kind of different positions, as well as some technology people, and trying to predict the future, right? Because we've, I'm fortunate enough to be a part of like this really large group of physicians, and we need to know as best possible what's going to happen. And so we spend time sitting around thinking about it. And one thing that we realized as a group, I guess, is we don't need to predict the future. We just need to go find it, because there are places that are actually 2 months ahead of us or 3 months ahead of us. And we can find places that have reopened their schools, for example, in Asia, and we can see how they did it. And we can look and see what worked and what didn't work, right? Japan reopens their schools. All the kids wear masks. They're okay. Korea reopens them. Nobody wears a mask. Now they're all in trouble, right? That would be the sort of thing that I would go out and try to predict. You guys don't have to figure this out right now, because I think it's still May, right? I don't know when you have to make a determination as principal and POWA unified and how that all goes down. But every 2 weeks that goes by, we learn more and more about this disease, and also we get to see other parts of the world that have been through it ahead of us and see what works and what doesn't work. And so, if school returns in August or whatever, and we look and we see, countries reopen their schools exactly like they always did, and they were fine, I would look at that and say, I'm reassured. Okay, yeah, I actually would be down with that plan. And if we looked and said countries reopened with precautions and they were fine, I'd say, okay, let's do that too. So that's kind of my thought.
Yeah, using that as a predictor for our future success, obviously, right? Looking at past performance, and we have that gift, as a global society, we don't want anybody to get harmed or killed by this thing, but we definitely can leverage each other's knowledge. Yeah. Again, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to do some questions and answers, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure.
A couple things too, like we're opening up Bridge. Like Bridge is our ESS before after school program, June 17th, on a smaller scale. Kind of like what we did with the loft. We kind of get people in there, and I think your kids even came up to the loft too.
Yeah, loved it.
So at Design 39, we're going to be one of the spaces that is going to be opened and super unique. So we get that opportunity to make sure we're doing best practice and consulting with you and others. I know we have fabulous doctors in our community, and I know a couple are on this call with us today as well. Vanessa has a couple comments there. But maybe if parents want to ask, I'll get to these two questions first. And then this one sounds a little technical, but so looking at 2009 and the issue with the pandemics, I don't know what that means, in Europe, increased risk narcolepsy? I don't know. I'm hacking this thing. Would you still be confident to get an expedited vaccine? Obviously HCP. So a lot of stuff I don't understand there. So maybe you can digest it for us.
Yeah, I'll break that question down, basically just kind of saying, are vaccines safe? And especially when they're rushed to market, right? That's what the question is. And so, the answer to that question is, I will be a little bit nervous getting the first dose of the vaccine. And And I am a little bit nervous when I get the flu vaccine too. Okay. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I'm not somebody who's going to say there's no side effect from getting a vaccine. Okay. You are introducing a foreign object into your body, and it's, there's something wrong with that. Your body knows it, and your body can respond to it in weird ways. That being said, I choose to vaccinate my kids, and I might spread them out. Like, if the doc says to me, you could get them all today, or you could get some today and some, next time, I'll say, oh yeah, let's spread them out. I like that idea. But the reality is I see people who don't get the vaccine get completely wrecked. And so I know that the alternative is not good, right? And I can't go through a flu season with my kid at risk. And I know that the vaccine is protective, right? I actually know that because I get to see people who don't get it and get wrecked from it. And so it's not like it completely protects you, but it certainly helps. And I'm pretty confident I know that as a physician. So my kids get the vaccine because for me, it would be unconscionable not to. That being said, I get patients who got the vaccine and now have like Guillain-Barré, which is a syndrome where you basically get this progressive paralysis. And, fortunately, if we pick it up, it gets better, but it's like this really scary thing. And I can only look and say, the only thing I can think of that caused this was your flu vaccine. And so it's not like it's completely without any, risk. But the reality is it does protect. It's not just herd immunity. There's this misconception that the vaccine itself is a herd immunity thing. That's the primary benefit from it. But there is actually a personal immunity benefit to it as well. So, there's reasons that I would say go with the vaccine. And yeah, will I be a little bit nervous the first time around? I will be. Will I get it? Absolutely. And I'll feel better about it a couple of years from now. But I get nervous with vaccine.
Yeah, Vanessa Park, she's one of our doctors as well, and she's also into the space and studies, UCSF and rounds that they've had, but more transmission from adult to adult and adult adolescents. Yeah. Maybe just to clarify that a little bit,
Yeah, no, totally. So
vectors. Not to spend too much time there, but we'll open it up.
No, Vanessa's point is kids are actually pretty safe. Kids are and I think we'll get that experience. We'll see people who send their countries that send their kids back to school and they're okay. Kids are not as, they don't create the viral loads that adults do when they get sick, and they don't get as sick as they do, and they don't transmit it as much. And so if you said to me, group of kids going to school, group of adults hanging out at a bar or restaurant, who's going to get it worse? The answer is the adults for sure. And yeah, if somebody does a study that says it's totally safe to send the kids out, then I'm totally down with that. That being said, we can't say that they are not potentially a vector because they are. But
it's that viral load, that you talked about. I think that's really a fascinating point and insight that you've shared with me, and I know our listeners. Just that viral load, that was new learning for me as well. Yep. All right, so we'll open it up. Anyone else has questions? We can just unmute your mic, and we'll go from there. Geronda, come on. I see you right there, center screen. Anyone have a question or a comment or feedback? One here is kids didn't like seatbelts or car seats, but we have them wear seatbelts and car seats, so might as well wear a mask. What do you think about that?
Yeah, we've kind of gotten to it. I put a mask on today when I went in the store. Just hate it, but I do it anyways. Get used. And I wear a seatbelt. By the way, I didn't used to wear a seatbelt when I was like a teenager. I was not wearing a seatbelt, and it took. I remember the girlfriend specifically. I was like in college, where she just was just like, "What? You're so smart and you're so stupid," and she kind of got me to realize I need to be wearing a seatbelt. But the first. Throughout my younger years, I was like, yeah, I don't need a seatbelt.
Yeah. Hey, Liz, what did you share there as a link? Liz Chan, what did you got? Unmute.
Oh, hi. I was just trying to look up the book that Dr. Butler
I like your drink. Your drink is your background here. That's good.
My new hobby during quarantine.
Yeah. So what you post there in the chat box?
Oh, it's just the book that, I'm not sure if it's the book that Dr. Butler was referring to, but it's a coronavirus-free book that you can kind of share with your kids.
Yep, yep. So, and this is, yeah, just a cute little book to talk about washing your hands, and there's a couple out there. This is a great one.
Fantastic. So that's there in the chat box. Anyone else?
By the way, I use the kids' books because I have to send materials out to doctors, and so I'll send them like the kid book is like the first link, and I'll say read this first, and then you can read the rest of the stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hi, this is Nathan. Thanks a lot, Dr. Butler.
Yeah.
Do you have a recommendation on mask materials?
I don't.
Crochet? Is crochet a good one?
It's not crochet.
Not crochet. Okay.
You've probably seen memes on the internet of that. So I don't, and the reason I don't is that I've got these paper masks that I have access to, and we haven't really had to go out and use too often, and so I use those. I see a lot of good masks out there and much cooler, what look like more comfortable masks, but I haven't gone into looking into it just because I happen to have all these other masks and it just hasn't been a topic that I've looked into. But
yeah, you were mentioning that though, the N93 one you use like with patients, but that idea of just having a regular mouth mask covering in regular public spaces, right? So there's like, on your condition that you're in.
Yeah, so I wear an N95 mask when I take care of patients, and sometimes I wear the full body suit, when I have to do procedures that are what we consider high risk procedures. So anything or whatever. But when we're out in public, just that guinea pig story, they were just using the paper surgical masks, and that's all that you really need to use, I think, to decrease. That's all that I use in public.
Hey,
yeah,
Vanessa, Dr. Park. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, Vanessa says, don't use the mask with valves. I don't know that, but it makes sense to me. Like when I look at them, I'm like, yeah, I don't know about this. To me, that looks like there's a risk of having a direct conduit, going the opposite way, but I haven't looked into them at all.
Yeah, Dr. Park, you want to add any content? Yeah.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Go for it.
So the masks with valves are meant to be more for an environmental mask, so to protect the wearer, but they don't actually protect anybody outside of the mask. So any exhaled breath still goes out into the open. So it doesn't necessarily, they were meant for people for like smoke and fires and fumes and things like that.
Helpful.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. You're basically just have a direct shot out. You're hurting everybody.
Yeah.
And there is this thing of asymptomatic transmission, right? So, none of us know right now that we don't have it or haven't had it.
All right, we have time for a few more questions. Anyone else?
Yeah, hi. Thanks a lot, Ian. My name is Matt Martin. I'm an intensivist at Scripps.
Oh, awesome. Which one?
Scripps Mercy.
Okay.
Spent April in New York City in the COVID ICUs. And I agree with you 100%. We're not having New York experience, and we can be thankful we're not. There's been a lot of talk about masks, and I think something that's been probably underappreciated is the role of hand hygiene and frequent cleaning of all the areas that people are touching all the time. And I can tell you, everybody was wearing masks in the New York ICUs. And then when those studies came out showing the virus particles where they were settling and they started cleaning everything, that's when we stopped seeing in-hospital transmission.
Yeah.
So as much or even more important than masks, I think, is the hand hygiene and, washing down of things like computer stations or things where, shared areas where kids or even adults are touching frequently. That's probably, I think, is even more of a risk for spread.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'm like, well, I don't really touch my mouth that much, but then, I'll eat like a potato chip and realize, wow, I literally probably, if I had it on my hands, it just went in my mouth. And, and similarly, there's times where I'll like touch my eye, or like, we don't realize just how much we do touch our face. And when people talk about the mask, protects you because it prevents you from touching your face, definitely does that. Although from the guinea pig story, we know that it also protects you from inhaling the particle. But yeah, I wash my hands so much more now than I used to. And absolutely, if I've been out in public or, around doing something where I potentially could have brought it home.
Yeah, and that was a critical piece for our parents in ensuring that kids are washing their hands, and how do they do that appropriately? And what about the hand sanitizer themselves? Because the district's risk management is talking about giving us like 5 or 6 of these stations, the hand sanitizer stations, inside, outside, and we have a few doctors on the call. Anyone could provide context for that.
Yeah, most of these things kill the virus, and so we have them like every 6 feet in the hospital these days, and just kind of walk by and grab a squirt of it and put it on. I not that it matters or is important, but I don't just do my hands, right? I actually will spread it all the way up my almost to my elbows, and not in like a crazy way, but just kind of I just kind of make sure that I get up a little bit higher, because I know that a lot of times my hands are actually touching not just themselves together, but also these parts of my forearm.
Thank you. Other thoughts or questions? Questions about riding bikes and getting out in public and your Jeep.
Yeah, hey, the Jeep is where it's at. Oh man, I've been doing so much fun stuff with that thing.
So we had 43 on this call, plus another 35 or so on the YouTube live channel. So almost, good group.
So Adrian, I have a quick question. What about children becoming asymptomatic carriers of COVID as they are close to each other in a school environment? The concern is as they come home, they spread the virus to parents, grandparents, etc., people that are more susceptible to the heavier hitting part of the disease.
I mean, I think that's a legitimate concern. I think that you can be reassured to know that the kids are less likely to get it and less likely to give it, but the reality is nobody wants to take a chance, right? And so I completely get that folks who have at-risk populations in their homes are going to isolate themselves differently than people who don't, and that makes sense.
Okay. Question here down at the bottom, Doc, was about the spread of the virus indoors, outdoors. Your patients who probably were asymptomatic, had other pre-existing conditions, were probably indoors. You also mentioned the Uber driver and probably some with the viral load and all that kind of confined spaces versus being inside, outside.
Yeah. Matt, you're at Mercy Hillcrest. Is that the one that you're at? Yeah. So Mercy Chula had a Uber driver. He's actually, I think he might have been a Lyft driver actually, who got it. And he was like a young guy, and one of the docs down there is a good friend of mine, and I just kind of asked him, like, the healthy guy, unhealthy guy. He's like, yeah, he's a pretty healthy guy, but he was driving a car around and probably had a bunch of people in Chula Vista, right, where they've got more of this disease, unfortunately, and had people getting in and out, and so I think he got exposed to that high load. And so again, it's not like young people aren't going to get sick in San Diego. They will. That's a great way to do it. Yeah, so ventilated places. Yeah, man, we should, if you get in a Lyft or Uber, roll the window down. And if you're hanging out with friends, do it in your backyard. I mentioned that I still hang out with friends. I do. Nobody's been in my house actually. We actually will go in the backyard, front yard, I'd say yard, there's no yard, but like hang out on the steps or whatever, and just kind of hang out there and talk, or across the fence with my neighbor or something like that. Not that it'd be crazy to have somebody in your house, but just, we're in San Diego, we don't need to. And the backyard's a great place to be. I think if you said to me, putting the kids back in school, I would say keep the windows as open as possible and let that virus float out into the sunlight and get killed.
And so one of the things we chatted about as well was antibody testing and testing itself. And there's actually free testing going on right now. And actually who should be tested, specifically with probably folks with pre-existing conditions.
Yeah.
So maybe you want to talk to us about that and the free testing going on.
Yep. So as far as the antibody testing goes, I'm sorry, I don't have a well enough educated opinion to be able to tell you. And part of that might be because we don't actually know which ones are working that well yet. So that one, unfortunately, I don't have a recommendation for. The other way that you can get tested is to have a swab put in your nose, right? And they kind of scrape up on the inside part of your nose, this place called the cribriform plate. It's incredibly uncomfortable. And then they will take that and try to see if they can sequence the virus, the DNA, RNA of it. So with that, you can get that test done for free and just call up San Diego, probably go online and figure it out, but San Diego Department of Health and set an appointment and go in there and get tested. One of my buddies, one of my docs who gets exposed, wanted to go visit his mother-in-law, and she was recently a patient in the ICU. So she's at risk, she's older, she was sick. And so he and his wife got the idea after he worked some shifts, there's a little bit of time off between his shifts, they went and got tested, and he didn't go back and get re-exposed to any patients. So, and they kept self-isolated for 3 days, got back the negative test result, and then flew out and visited, her mom. That to me would be the right time to get tested. So I'm not going to go in there, spend my day getting my nose scraped when I don't even think I have it. But if I was going to go out and visit somebody who was at risk, and I could isolate myself for a few days waiting for that test result, yeah, is that foolproof? No. Does that make sense? It does, yeah.
Like you said, the tests are evolving and getting better as we speak, and it might be the way that it's swabbed or the location that it's being swabbed, or
yeah.
You also have the secondary tests with you called it a lung something. There was a lung flesh.
Yeah. So, sometimes we'll send off tests on people. Literally, we will put a tube all the way inside of their lungs, squirt a little bit of saline in, suck it back out, and send that off for sampling. And that's pretty accurate. The nose one, we have had patients where their nose was negative, and we were so convinced that they had it that we sent off the sample from their lung and it came back positive. So the nose one is not 100%. I don't want to give it a number because every hospital's is different and ours is different, and it depends on whether or not the person is willing to really torture you and get a good sample or not. And we're basing their sampling techniques off of other viruses anyways, so who knows if coronavirus really likes the cribriform plate or if it would rather be down somewhere else. I don't know. And there's competing opinions about it, but no test is 100%.
Yeah, one of our viewers wanted to know about their younger kid, is 6 years old currently, had pneumonia with a collapsed lung at 3, or at risk, as a 6-year-old.
Yeah,
stay away from peers.
Answer's probably not. But Matt, you were going to say something about the test.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say regarding the antibody test, there's a bunch of them out there. If you're going to get it done, the Abbott ABBOTT test seems to be the most reliable, and it's actually very reliable. I think if that information is going to change anything for you, I think it's a great idea to get that test. Like I got it because I'm in contact with coronavirus patients, and I actually came back antibody positive, which theoretically,
lucky guy.
Yeah, theoretically means I'm immune. We don't know how long that lasts, but I think if that information is going to mean anything to you, and if anything, I think it makes you breathe a little easier if you're positive, and it may change your behavior if you're clearly antibody negative. So the antibody test just tells you if you're basically immune or theoretically immune. So either you had it or you were asymptomatic and might have had it and you developed antibodies. But if you're going to get the antibody test, I would recommend the Abbott test because there's a bunch of other less reputable ones out there.
And I would tell folks, don't change your behavior too much based on that test result, because if I can, and this reasoning may not be correct, but if you can say, okay, we give plasma actually to patients that are positive from donors that are positive. So we take the antibodies out of people who had it and we give it to people that have it, trying to see if there's benefit. And there is some benefit, but the benefit is widely variable. And the hypothesis is not everybody's antibodies confer the same amount of immunity. So just because your antibody test came back positive, you were exposed, you don't know for a fact that you have enough of those antibodies. You have enough to make the test positive, but maybe not enough to protect you from, the disease, et cetera. So, it's if you like Matt said, if you've got a reason to do it, then do it. But don't change your behavior based on the result.
I think also with the low prevalence of disease in San Diego County, you actually do have a much higher chance of getting a false positive as well. So if somebody has been self-isolating for 3 months and they think they might have gotten sick back in January and think they might have had it, there's probably a higher chance that it's a false positive if their antibody test comes back positive. Now with Dr. Martin, I would expect that, yeah, he's probably positive because he was exposed. But I think I wouldn't do it just because somebody's curious.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We don't have, of all the tests, I was looking today, of all the tests that we've run in Palomar, less than 7% of them are positive. And those are people coming to the hospital thinking they may have it. Those are people who came through the ER. And so if those people are only 7% or less, then you can imagine the general population is less. When they went and tested all of New York, like 30% of people had gotten it in some parts and very different prevalence. And so, exactly. It's back to that kid, who had the collapsed lung. I'm not a pediatrician, and so I don't know the answer to that question. My general thought would be probably not at risk, but I'm not a pediatrician. My guess is they had a really bad pneumonia, and that was that.
Yeah, good to we don't all know everything, right? And so we put our best heads together. Right?
I know very little, by the way.
Yeah, right. We're gonna go quote each other and put you on Twitter and call it quit. Not so much. It's about trying to create the best information that we have at this time, our best version. How do we work smart together? We know that we're better when we're learning together, and how we can do that and still keep kids safe and our grandparents safe and ourselves safe. So, that's why we're doing these conversations. And this is number 2. I think there's one more question here, and we'll probably close it out with maybe some final comments. At this time, are there any safe ways for children from different households to play together?
So, as I mentioned before, I do let my kid play with another kid or another household of kids. So, one of the play sets is another kid. Another one is 2 brothers that are in the same house, and there's some risk to that, but it's low enough that I find it tolerable. And if you said to me birthday party, I would probably not do a birthday party right now. But is it safe? Sure. I mean, make them wash their hands, wear a mask, stay 6 feet apart, all that. That's one level of it. There's also slightly less safe ways, which would be limiting the number of kids around or the number of households really that are being exposed or something like that. Limiting the things that they're doing, kind of, and so there's high risk stuff, which is playing indoors with a bunch of slobbered on toys. And there's low risk stuff, which is playing outside, exploring the woods together, I say that there's rattlesnakes out there, so be careful. But, but the point is, outdoor play with one other kid. Yeah, go for it. I mean, I do.
Our custodians would say our kids like to lick windows all over our place, but yeah, I don't think that'll happen anymore. I'm going to be biased. I'm going to let us slip in one more question here because it has to do with school. Air circulation in the classrooms, potential exposure to the virus in the classroom environment is unknown for many reasons, but as a precaution, good ventilation. Should we limit the amount of time in classrooms that are closed up and let them ventilate out? And then because we have lots of open spaces, right, that are not just closed classrooms like you would see in typical school.
Yeah.
We have collaboration spaces, able to spread people out.
So I
we'll
don't
kind of end there and our best guess.
Yeah. So I don't know what the air circulation system is there and how the air gets filtered. I can tell you that in our rooms in the ICU, the air doesn't change between 30 minutes, right? And so if you're all in a room together for 30 minutes, that room is probably going to have the same level of pathogen in it, or probably less if there's circulation running as everyone's kind of settled and sitting down. So I don't know that the time exposed, if it's the same group of people, is going to change too much. But that's literally a question that would have to be answered by some studies about air and circulation.
Well, you know, the rumor about Design 39 is that we have cucumber water and we also have hospital quality air, just so you know. So that's the new rumor. So you can get your cucumber water and hospital quality air at Design 39. Come today.
These days isn't a good thing.
Oh, wait, we don't have that. Well, we really appreciate everybody coming on, and to our doctors who are in our space who are willing to share their knowledge, and you know, we're in good hands.
Yeah. Thanks to the other docs, absolutely, for being here.
Yeah.
So and
All right,
thank
boss.
you for the
All
opportunity.
right, thank you. All right, signing off for now. Thanks,
got it.
everybody.
Thank you. Great.
All right, I stopped.